Thank you, Ambassador. I want to echo your comments on to our veterans that their service was not in vain. They protected this nation for 20 years from a major terrorist attack like 9/11, and we thank them for that. We also want to thank the parents of Marine Corps Corporal Hunter Lopez and Marine Corps Sergeant Nicole G., who are here today, and to the Lopez family, Ms. Shamlin, and the rest of the Gold Star families. We honor your sacrifice and your children. In November, you testified before this committee in a transcribed interview, and you just restated that you presented to the Biden administration and to the president basically three options on the Doha agreement. One, to basically ignore it and unconditionally withdraw. Two, to tear it up. And three, to enforce its conditions against the Taliban. You also testified that you and Secretary Blinken both recommended to President Biden that he enforce Doha's condition. But instead, the president ignored your advice or disagreed and chose to ignore the Doha conditions and unconditionally withdraw. Is that correct?
I think there was the opportunity for me to brief the president, as you said, correct, and the options that he had. And it was clear that it would be desirable that the final withdrawal happens after there is an agreement between the government and the Taliban. And that was broadly supported, that idea. But upon discussion and deliberation and consultations with allies and others, and the allies too favored withdrawal after there was an agreement between the government and the Taliban. But there was a judgment that if we did that, since that was not part of the Doha agreement, and that it could result in a protracted delay in the withdrawal of forces, as we couldn't be certain when and if the Afghans would reach an agreement. And if there was a risk of going back to war and perhaps sending more troops, the decision was not to pursue that, and there was broad support for that decision.
But your recommendation to the president was to enforce Doha's conditions, correct?
That was part of the agreement, yes. And we restated that this was a condition-based agreement. It was a package deal. There were linkages. What we did depended on the Taliban delivering on their commitments.
Right, and the president disagreed with you and chose not to enforce the conditions.
Well, I described the discussion that occurred and the judgment that was made.
And the conditions were not enforced, and as a result, the Taliban's in control of Afghanistan today, correct?
Well, I would say it's clear that the Taliban are in control, but I would put the responsibility for what happened largely on the shoulders of the Afghan government leadership for not standing for their government, for their system, and for the values that they said they believed in.
And I agree. I think President Ghani's actions were cowardice, and fleeing his country as a coward. Not a good example. Let me turn to the meeting you had in Doha between yourself, General McKenzie, and the Taliban leader Mullah Baradar. You said that the Taliban offered to give the United States control of Kabul for the purposes of evacuation, but that offer was turned down. When asked by my committee at your interview whether the Taliban viewed that as a, quote, green light to take over Kabul, you said, quote, I think that's clear. Do you agree with that statement?
I agree that we had made an agreement for the Taliban not to enter Kabul, and for a delegation to come from Kabul. President Ghani had agreed to it as well, to negotiate a power-sharing government to take over on September 1 in a meeting of 200 Afghan notables present.
Right. But McKenzie says that's not my mission because his orders are not to secure Kabul for
indeed.
evacuation. His orders are to evacuate
Indeed.
by July 4th, and he didn't have the troops allocated for that. Now, he could have raised that to the president. Was this meeting, to your knowledge, ever reported to the White House?
It was reported clearly to the entire government, but it was reported after General McKenzie said on the spot there that that wasn't, as you said, Chairman, his mission to secure Kabul. And the initial goal was for Taliban not to be in Kabul. In fact, it presented them with a map of some 20 to 25 miles away from the center, within that area, that there should be no Talib present. But the departure of President Ghani and increased widespread concern by Afghans in Kabul about law and order, with the disintegration of the security forces, the options were either that, as the Talibs offered, that we take responsibility. And General McKenzie, as you said correctly, Chairman, I was present in the meeting, and that was not part of his mission. And then the discussion shifted to where the Talibs could go for
because
securing
his
the
understanding, McKenzie's understanding, the president wouldn't authorize more troops to take over Kabul for purposes of the evacuation.
Well, I can't comment on that because I wasn't present in any discussion if he may have had.
Now, if that had happened, imagine wouldn't that have been a little different, right? We take over Kabul for purposes of the evacuation. The Taliban agrees to stay out, this 20-mile radius, and they don't take over HKIA. They're not part of this chaos at the very end. And the suicide bomber coming from this prison out of Bagram, I'm not asking you to speculate, but it's very foreseeable that may never have happened. And this report does go to the White House, and yet nothing is done to change the course of events, correct?
Well, your account is correct, but we don't know what else could have happened if that decision was made. So that we're entering speculation now.
No, I guess the bottom line is you really can't trust the Taliban. And I see my time has expired.